think of something in your life where you were given this big ass obstacle that hurts so much.
Whew.
And then you have to go, oh, and also love, period. End of sentence. And that's the frequency you have to find in that moment. How that's a cosmic joke. That's comedy.
Las distracciones y narrativas reinan este mundo tecnológico. Todos tienen una opinión de lo que es la verdad y lo que es mentira. ¿Quién controla el mundo? Los aliens son real. ¿Vivimos en un Matrix? Estas preguntas serán debatidas con José y Daniel G, explorando y descubriendo las verdades de nuestro mundo, nuestras creencias y nuestro reality. Welcome to Cultura Truth Project. Dímelo, mi gente. Welcome back. Es otro episodio de Cultura Truth Project. Estamos de vuelta. José González, José G, aquí con ustedes. Mi hermano, Daniel González, Daniel G.
¿Qué es la que hay, mi gente? ¿Cómo están? ¿Cómo están, mi gente? I'm good, bro. Man, I am so excited. I've been hyped for this one for a while. Bro, you brought someone else in today. You brought in someone very, very interesting para el episodio de hoy.
Come on, man. I had to dig deep into my bag of tricks for this. But, you know, before we get started, I do want to thank everybody who's listened on the audio version, everybody who watches the YouTubes and following all the new clips. Thank you guys so much. Very humbled, very, very thankful. Muy agradecido a todo el mundo que está por ahí en el mundo. Mira, desde España a Puerto Rico, a todo el mundo. En los audio stats me están diciendo que todo el mundo está escuchando.
That's awesome.
Look, it looks like the 3-letter agencies are already trying to silence what's about to happen, bro. That's what it sounds like. All right, guys. But today's episode, I did bring a special guest. Now, me and this lady, we've traveled across the country together. She's done readings on me personally on my podcast, Analyze This. She's a character, but she is the character in all of the best ways. Give it up for tarot card reader, astrologer, metaphysical practitioner, my good friend, Kristy Belich.
What's up, guys?
Woo!
I'm gonna have to get a button so that way we can have a round of applause for all of our new guests.
Oh my God, it'll be great.
Kristy, welcome to the show. Thank you for coming on Cultura Truth Project. Thank you for coming on.
Muchas gracias. It's nice to be here.
Awesome. Guys, make sure you follow the show on Cultura Truth Project on YouTube, on Rumble, at Cultura Truth Project. Follow Gonzalez Media TV on Facebook and on Instagram. That's where we go and put all of our content on there on Gonzalez Media TV. And subscribe to the podcast on all major platforms, on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, iHeartRadio, Google Podcasts. Leave a 5-star review so that way we can open people's eyes and ears to the reality of this world. Pero, mi gente, let's talk to Kristy, porque Kristy, Danny, cuéntame un poquito de Kristy, porque Kristy is a very interesting young lady. She reads tarot. How do you know Kristy?
So we're going to get into a little bit of the background just so people get how I met Kristy. Kristy and I are both stand-up comedians, but more than she's a stand-up, she's one of the craziest, most spiritual people I've ever met. One of my favorite stories I'd like to tell people about Kristy was we were in Austin about 2 years ago, and we were outside of an open mic just kind of hanging out. And Kristy and I were, God knows how high we were, but we were very, very out there. And she looks at me, she was like, Danny, you have 2 giant angels protecting you. And I was like, Lord, baby Jesus, this lady is out of her mind, and I want to get to know her. So next thing you know, we've done several several podcasts together. We've traveled all over Texas and parts of the country, man. And, you know, she's become one of my lifelong friends. And I truly enjoy having conversations with her on podcast platform and even just over the phone. Kristy, man, I miss you so much. How you been, girl?
I'm good. ¿Cómo estás?
Ya tú sabes, nena, ya tú sabes, aquí trabajando como un loco, pero siempre pa'lante.
I saw you guys in the intro had the pandemic cut in there.
The pandemic. Oh yeah, it's called the pandemic for sure. Kristy, I guess you tell us about you, man. How did you get into tarot? Why tarot? You know, there's so many, like, as Latinos, Jose can tell you this, like, it was God, Jesus, and Walter Mercado was the way things were in a Hispanic household. But you have taken tarot kind of in your own direction in a sense, because I don't know much about it, but I do know Kristy Belich's take on tarot and what she's told me over the years. But what is tarot and why did you get into tarot?
Sure. So I actually added tarot in 2015, but I actually started my career in science, hard sciences, and I used to work with, now I'm an older lady, so I used to work during the Iraq-Afghanistan war with large primates. I was in animal sciences, and I worked with animals most of my life. And during that time, I was seeing a lot going on in the world. But I think everybody, if you're working with spirituality, has kind of an awakening moment. I think for the collective, 2020 was considered a massive awakening moment for a lot of people. So I'm not sure what you would consider me. Sometimes I feel like I've always been an alien on this weird planet that we're on. But when I worked with primates, I learned a lot about communication on a different level. And it wasn't through anything. It was really, I studied, biology and chemistry and mathematics. And there was this moment where I was working with an animal and it spoke to me, but I can't explain how the animal spoke to me. It just told me it was going to die. And I told my manager the animal was going to die, and she told me I was crazy. And the next day I got to work and the animal had passed away overnight. So it was from there, a couple other things occurred in my life. I had a horse, and while he was dying, I had my hand on his head when we had the vet come to put him down, and he started speaking to me in another language. And I stayed at this ashram, and a friend told me he was speaking to me. I met this woman, and she said that she translated what he said to me, which was basically to life in Hebrew. So my horse, when he was dying, was speaking to me in my brain in Hebrew. And so it wasn't really tarot. Tarot was just kind of a physical ability to show people. And so same with astrology. Astrology was my portal in because it allowed me to have hard data as somebody who was working with, lung and heart disease patients in a laboratory. And I actually worked with mainly Latino patients in Upper Manhattan, New York for a while. So it's interesting because I did live in a lot of neighborhoods where we had botanicas and people who practice Santeria and things like that. So one of my first decks was actually from a Brooklyn botanica from a woman who it was very, very, very old school. But I started in astrology because it was data sciences and it was the closest to me that I could understand.
So, you said you got into astrology before you got into tarot. Can you, in the simplest way possible, explain the differences between astronomy and astrology? Because I think to most people, especially people who don't know, that terminology gets kind of confused and misinterpreted. And it's almost like, well, you were studying the stars, but like astrology is slightly different than astronomy. And please explain that, please.
Sure. So when we're looking at astronomy, we're looking at the mathematical points. of the planets and the aspects like asteroids, comets, systems that are in the sky. So there are astrologers that use NASA data. So for example, CoStar app, where you can do both astrology and astronomy, will look at the NASA data. Astrology, we're looking at the zodiac systems in the sky, where we're kind of seeing how it reflects on Earth based on the point position of Earth. If we lived on Mercury, we would adjust for that, for example. But we're looking at the point position of the overarching star positions, basically, and how that affects our energy. Astronomy, we're looking at hard data, where they overlap. For example, I have read for an astronomer. And so when I was saying, Mercury's in retrograde, she said, absolutely, I can see here in the data that Mercury's in retrograde. So if you think of astrology, it's one of the oldest sciences of all time, where we can combine the positions of the planets, the stars, the systems. And by the way, this is in our dumb human primitive brains that we're looking at it, right? So who knows, what else exists on a mathematical plane, but we're looking at this from the way that we can translate it, just as we are translating the Bible from what we know. So it's very complex, and also we have to remain open-minded on that as well.
That's one thing that I've realized doing research on all these different topics that Danny and I cover, is that the more I learn, the more I realize I don't know shit. Right? It's because, like, our first guest, Juan, he dives really deep into alchemy, right? And when I started diving into, I'm like, well, I don't even understand what the heck these people are talking about. So when I hear people talking about Mercury is in retrograde, Pluto is, moving into Aquarius, like, that's foreign language to me. But I do understand that there is something significant behind these astrological occurrences. But moving back to the tarot, because we started with tarot, I don't want to kind of move all over the place, but we started with tarot. Can you briefly explain, like, how did tarot become kind of mainstream? Because it's starting to become more mainstream. You see it on TikTok all over the place now. What's the history of tarot? How did it become kind of mainstream now?
Unfortunately, I am not a historian on tarot.
Okay.
However, I can say, here's what I would say from what I know. This has a medieval history to it. So the deck that mainly would be used in the zeitgeist, I apologize. I would have to Google.
No, you're good. That's
the name
what we
is
do here.
escaping me. But basically the roots are medieval. But they were illegal for many, many years. So to be caught with a tarot deck in certain parts of the world would be considered illegal. So the roots themselves, date back for many centuries. Unfortunately, I can't give names or historic dates. That is not my specialty. But when I decided to pick up a tarot card deck, it's when I was still living in New York City. It had been suggested to me to start doing readings professionally. And so I put myself on a website called Gig Masters. Mm-hmm. And I got my first, it's called the Rider-Waite Tarot deck. And the Rider-Waite is kind of the traditional tarot deck. So if you reference any tarot deck, the pictures in there are generally like dated back to medieval times. And when I did a reading, I just started seeing pictures the same way when I worked with animals of people's lives, their loved ones, their crossed loved ones. My first gig was in Brooklyn, New York, and it was at a party. And they ended up having a line around the apartment to wait for me. And I stayed extra time. What started happening in New York City is I started getting these gigs, and this was before the vid times. But I started getting these gigs, and they would hire me for an hour, 2 hours, and I started getting lines around the door. It just went from there. But I taught myself how to read tarot on my own just through YouTube. And just, asking, I had no freaking clue what I was doing. I just saw pictures and felt things. So I think a lot of readers start out in a very odd way. I'm glad that I have Brooklyn roots, Manhattan roots, that I can say taught me how to read tarot, because I learned how to read in public. I learned how to read out in the middle of Washington Square Park. So there's a lot of cool roots that come with a lot of weird tarot gigs I've had.
Now, can anybody read tarot, or there's like some type of like crazy initiation you got to do in order to be certified in the tarot card reader world?
Yeah, like, do you have to like cut yourself open, put the blood on the deck, and
like a ritual.
give yourself to like the devil or something? Like, what's going on? What's the whole deal with tarot?
No, it's interesting how different, sides of society will look at things. I look at tarot as it's a visual of our intuition. It's a visual of maybe inner guidance that we already knew, or if you believe in loved ones helping you out, or spirit guides, or angels, if you believe in that. But everybody has their own approach, so everybody can read tarot. But the same way that you can read tarot is, I tell everybody, start with a playing card deck. That is as old school as it gets, and that is Latin traditional roots. That's, as old school as it gets. Just go to the grocery store, get a $1 playing card deck and start there. Bless it with your hands and just say, I'm grateful for this deck. This is going to be my intuition deck. Another way I started reading, I'm a stand-up comic. I work my ass off. I take gigs wherever I can. And when I lived in New York City, I used to walk dogs. And that was a lot. Like, if you ever go to New York City, dog walking is like the gig there. Like, if you see people walking a whole bunch of dogs around. And what I started noticing while I was learning tarot is I started seeing playing cards just on the streets of Brooklyn or on the streets of Harlem. And I have a couple of pictures on my IG of just not tarot cards, playing cards I would see on the ground. And when I would see it, I'd take a picture, and then I'd look up what tarot card it correlated to see whether it's spirit or guidance was telling me. And this has happened when I lived in LA. I was thinking about moving to Texas, and I swear to God, I have it documented. I was thinking about moving to Austin. All this shit was going down in LA. I was like, this is the scariest decision. And as I walked to a place called the Fourth Wall, which is a comedy venue, the entire street on Hollywood Boulevard, there was like 5 playing cards just laid out. And I took pictures of them to see what my tarot reading was for that day. So tarot reading is very personal, and it can be as weird as seeing playing cards on the ground, or just going to a bookstore and getting a deck for yourself.
Wow.
But it's no Diablo. It's no bad spirits. It's really your heart.
It's a tool, right?
Yeah.
It's a tool. It's just like like a piece of technology, like your phone, right? You can either use it for good or bad, and there's people in the space that use it for good things and use it for bad things. So it's just a tool. The way that I can look at it. What do you think, Danny?
Well, I have mixed feelings about the tarot, right? I got faith in a higher power that I'm very unshakable on, but I can't deny the power or the power we put into things like that, right? So, I meet a person like Kristy, and I know she has a good heart, and I know that she has good intentions, and she's using these tools. I can't think of it to be too bad, regardless of what my personal beliefs are. When going through tough seasons, I reached out to Kristy. It's like, hey, what are the spirits saying? And it's an interesting thing, because like I always think back to the many conversations that we had. It's like, as an astrologer and you read tarot, like you're also part of this metaphysical thing. You just mentioned even earlier how you spoke with animals. And then, you know, the story I told about us in the beginning of the podcast, it's like, have you always been able to do that type of stuff, being able to see things, hear things, speak to things, that led you into deep diving in these other aspects of tarot and astrology?
Well, you know, science was my number one, and I wanted to be a veterinarian. I think that that was always my goal when I was younger, when I went to school. And, you know, I think that I've watched society shift a lot, man. I mean, you know, you'd have to be truly an ostrich with your head in the sand to not see that there's something shifting in society that we cannot explain. And I was raised Catholic. I was baptized Catholic, you know. I definitely believe in Jesus, but I think that there needs to be maybe a reframe of how we're viewing all of that's going on in the world. So this is a very complex question because on so many levels, like I did when I was younger see dead people, but what basically scared a member of my family. And when my family member got scared, I didn't see them anymore. So, you know, I think that when we're young, we're told it's wrong, and then we let that gift go away. And then there's a time in our life when that gift reappears, and it could be, you know, when you're in your 20s, it can be when you're in your 70s, you know, it really depends on where your gifts are needed. And I think, you know, Daniel, I've known you for so long. You know, I feel like I've known you for lifetimes, bro. Like,
I know. It's like I say, she's like my sister. I tell you, sometimes I wonder, you know, I always say a prayer for Kristy wherever she's at. You know, she's a true nomad.
That's beautiful.
You know, she's a true nomad. She goes everywhere. So I'm always like, I hope she's doing good, man. Just send her a little prayer. Tell Jesus to watch after her for me. You know what I'm saying?
yeah,
That's beautiful. That's beautiful. You know, but touching on what Danny was talking about, and you know, and thank you for sharing, you know, your experiences growing up and having that connection with that beyond realm, right? Because that's, you know, that's another dimension. There's many podcasts and people that talk about 4D, 5D, you know, different frequencies and things like that. So one thing that Danny asked earlier was astrology versus astronomy. Now we're going to move into the metaphysics part of it because, you know, we've had a boom in New Age thought and a boom in metaphysical thought and practice. I would say probably since COVID, since 2020, since this great awakening that everybody, I personally have noticed it, and I'm sure Danny and everybody else has. But what are the main differences, or are they the same thing? Are New Age and metaphysics the same thing, or are they not?
here's how I'll say it, because I am not the dictator of metaphysics, but I'll say it with respect to, you know, I want to say that I'm a trained scientist first. And I think that learning to trust my intuition has been the hardest thing over the years. Comedy's helped a lot. So with metaphysics and New Age, it depends on how you look at it. I was thinking about this today because we're considered in the age of Aquarius now by certain people. Mm-hmm. I also look at this as the planet or dwarf star, depending on your camp. So, for example, an astrophysicist would look at Pluto as a dwarf star. An astrologer would look at Pluto as a planet. So when we look at the energy, though, of Pluto, which I think is more metaphysics because we're looking at the energy of a planet where things are kind of going past the time and space continuum, Pluto is asking us as a collective to transform from a place of a third element. So we're looking at beyond elemental definitions. I think that we have to expand the definitions of many things, and this is going to be maybe a decade process where we're going to look at time and space from a very different perspective. We're going to look at generational energy as a very, like, look at Gen Z versus baby boomers. You know, I was born in 1986, but I feel like I've been reborn. You know, I feel like I'm dumber than I've ever been, and I have so much more to learn.
Preach, lady, preach. I'm just saying.
That's funny that you say that, Kristy, because I feel the same exact way. I feel like
I think that's a collective consciousness right there, because I'm not much younger than you, Kristy, born in 90. And it's like every day that I wake up, I'm like, I know less and less. I don't know if it's, again, 3-letter agencies. I know less and less. And I'm just feel like the universe is reteaching a lot of old lessons in many, many ways, but also like there's this whole different, like, you could look at it from a like a geopolitical perspective. We're in a new industrial revolution and the information revolution, right? But like it's also spiritual. Like there's a shift coming. You know, the Bible talks about it. The Quran talks about it. All these things talk about it, that this is the age of transformation. And I think you're touching on something way deeper than just tarot metaphysics.
Yes. This is totally a new industrial revolution where we're learning our actual energy is what was being siphoned and is being siphoned. You know, what was the, you know, it goes far deeper, and I don't want to like get you guys flagged on the AI stream, but it goes deeper into like what is the human soul, you know, and why. I'm grateful. I think that my travel, you know, I've traveled the United States multiple times by myself in my car. You know, I was lucky that I was during 2020 essentially mainly a road comic because I couldn't get gigs anywhere. So I was through a lot of nations, Navajo, Hopi. You know, I've been on their reservation land. I went to the top of the Navajo mountain to say a prayer. And I realized, you know, the energy of the indigenous tribes, what is that? Why was that siphoned? What's going on? And if we go into Christianity, you know, there's a lot to be said there with genetics and energy. What's being siphoned? I mean, the unspoken, but there's an actual war going on as we speak, you know?
That's interesting that you say that, because when we're talking about the different things that we've been taught growing up, you know, you were born Catholic, we were also born and baptized Catholic and raised in the Catholic Church as kids. We're taught certain things that you can't do this, you can't do that, you shouldn't be able to do this, you need to pray to this person or this saint and these things, right? And as I've gotten older, I've realized that's not necessarily the case, right? And you talked about energy, and when we talk about energy, we also talk about vibration and frequency, because that is a form of energy, right? I believe, and this is just me, and we can have a debate about it, but the reason that they've kind of codified and changed a lot of things about the history, especially like when it comes to Jesus, because I think Jesus mastered vibration, mastered frequency, mastered being able to open up his pineal gland and become just the best, most ascended master. And these people knew that. And what does it say in the Bible, or what is this? I'm not a Bible theologian. I don't study it, but I do know that there is a line that says you need to make the path to the light hard and difficult for the weak and weary, so they can't follow. Right. And that all ties into vibration and frequency. So in the best way and the most simplest way, right? What's your interpretation of vibration and frequency and energy, so people can have a better understanding of what we're dealing with and talking about?
Absolutely. And I just want to approach this as I'm not an expert. I'm healing it myself. I'm a human having a human experience. So as a human having a human experience of vibration and energy, you know, that's where astrology comes in for me. That helps me understand when I reach these walls, these brick walls that life brings. You know, I know that my astrology chart gives me assignments. And it could be that we were all born of love. We were all born of pure love, right? But at the same time, what comes in, like, you know, Jesus, I think, is the vibration of love. Period. End of
Jesus,
sentence.
according to the word, he is love.
Yeah.
Right? According to the word, he is the embodiment of love. Period.
He didn't even, he just was. He came in knowing. He came in already with the downloads or with the knowledge or with the power, and it wasn't a place of him being overt, or he literally came in and said, this is what I do, and I know I'm here to do this, and I know I'm here to die for it, because he died for love. So our assignment is, we have to learn that. And for some of us, love is, having to go through these big old obstacles of like, did I think I was going to be assigned to have to stand up on a stage and tell jokes in front of, people and then, think of something in your life where you were given this big ass obstacle that hurts so much. And then you have to go, oh, and also love, period. And the sentence. And that's the frequency you have to find in that moment. How that's a cosmic joke. That's comedy.
Wow. That's wow.
No, that hit different here. That hit different here, Jose. Listen, what she just talked about was the assignment of becoming a comedian is such a big ask of somebody, right? Like there's naturally talented people, and then there's everybody else, right? In any given field. But I think in the realm of stand-up, and I can speak to this because Kristy knows the blood, sweat, and tears I put into this crap. It's one of those things where it's like literally it takes a special type of human. And I respect every stand-up comedian to ever live. I really do. Whether I agree with them or not, or like him as a person or not, there's a level of respect that they have from me that goes beyond anything else. Because to show up at some godforsaken venue where 3 people show up and you got stiffed on what you were supposed to get paid, but as the stand-up, the love for the art, the love to entertain, the love to make people laugh, because we know the power of laughter heals people. Like we'll do it anyway. And it's like the most disrespected art form in the world, but it's also the people that do it are a special kind of human. And I say that because she just said it the best way possible. It's like, it's nobody wakes up one day and says, I want to be a stand-up. It chooses you. It truly chooses you. How it chooses you, that story is individual to each person. But how that it chooses you and when it chooses you and the time of life that it chooses you, oh my God. Like I say this all the time. And to really drive the point home, it was like my love for stand-up cost me more than I've ever invested in anything else. Mm-hmm. And Kristy can tell you that. Kristy has seen like what I went through firsthand. Like she was like, oh shit, like Danny's lost it all. And I still went out there and performed because of the love for the comedy, for the art. It's ridiculous. It's stupid, but it's wow. Beautifully said, Kristy.
Well, it's not stupid. It's just it makes you feel unwrapped. It unwraps you. It literally is a spiritual awakening. But it's the same like for anybody pursuing something that's out of the box, it's you're literally in there. You're like, here's my soul. Judge it. Here you go. It's definitely it's how can it not be Christian to be a comedian? How can it not be, even if you're saying blue jokes, who the fuck cares? Like the most Christian, most religious people I've ever met are not the people preaching. So
that's very, very true. Wow. I mean, I'm still, wow. my mind is still blown because of that statement. You know, Jesus is the frequency of love, right? And that just kind of brings me back to the first two commandments. That, you know, you should love God with all your heart, and you should love thy neighbor with all your heart. Love. It's all about love, right? And love being that highest form of frequency, that highest form of vibration. I want to get into the energy centers. So how do how does the vibration and frequency affect your energy centers, and what are the energy centers, and how can one activate them? Because energy centers are known as many different things, right? They're known as chakras, or I don't know, but I've started looking into this and I started finding words I didn't understand. So hey, let's talk about energy centers and how does vibration and frequency affect your energy centers?
Well, you know, how about we approach this with curiosity? Because, you know, when I was so worked at this hospital in Upper Manhattan, and we had a break between two different studies. So I had 3 months, and I went to Canada, and I stayed at this ashram called Yashodhara Ashram. And the way I ended up there was I had a dream about the place. I didn't know the place was in Canada. I just had a dream about this lake in these mountains behind the lake, but it was a very specific shoreline. And when I was Googling ashrams, I thought it was like a day trip I could take to North New York and come back on the train and just go up and like do yoga and all that stuff. That's not what Spirit did. I ended up finding this ashram in the middle of nowhere in the place called Kootenay Bay, Canada, which is in British Columbia. And I stayed there, and we learned about different chakra systems, but they approached it from a very different way than, say, like, you know, just a Google search. They approached it through looking at chakras from a very personal perspective. And so I correlated it to astrology. So I know, Daniel, I know your zodiac sign. And
Scorpio, baby.
Scorpio. And I don't want to like overstep boundaries, but definitely like
go for it. We're in a public platform. Go ahead.
Oh, cool. But every zodiac sign has like, I think, a different chakra assignment. So that's how I look at the energy centers, is like, again, we come in with a different vibrational assignment. So like, for example, a Scorpio would have like a second chakra assignment of healing. So you're learning how to master that in your own life. And then you have to take it and heal others with that. So that's just a basic look at, like, say, what would Daniel be working on? You know, I'm an Aries and I have, you know, depression. So my crown chakra, Aries rules like this part, the crown, the brain. You know, I have to learn to not be ashamed to talk about having depression and just take it to the stage, you know. But the chakras for us, you know, we experience different things like trauma. I think society has gone through a mass trauma, which I also think has disturbed the energy. If you're talking about collective consciousness, you know, and we can, if we're going deep, we can even talk about what we think, you know, the CV thing was and what that was meant for and what that has done, or even something that, say, you would put in your arm, like something like that too. So, you know, I think all of that stuff was meant to disrupt our frequency,
It's interesting that you bring that up, because one of my business partners, he dives really, really deep into spirituality. And we had a conversation about the toroidal field. Are you familiar with the toroidal field?
I am not.
So the toroidal field is an energy that exists within all of us. It's kind of like a donut. Let me bring it up on screen so you can see what I'm talking about. So basically, the toroidal field extends 6 feet out.
I call that heart cohesion. Heart cohesion.
Yes.
Heart cohesion.
So I'm going to bring it up here on screen. So this is the toroidal field. See, so it kind of looks like a donut, and it surrounds us, and it extends 6 feet in circumference. So the thought was, why do you think there was, you know, the social distancing of 6 feet apart? right?
Mhm.
It was because so that way people wouldn't intermingle their energies during this time. So it's interesting that you brought that up because I mean, I don't know if it's true, right? But it makes a lot of sense because, and this is a scientific fact, and everything has a toroidal field, a tree, a plant, your dog, the
The
planet has its
Earth.
own, the earth has its own toroidal field. So if every human on earth has a 6 foot circumference toroidal field and they wanted a social distancing 6 feet away, I'm just saying, put 1 and 2 together, it has to add up to 3. What do you think, Kristy?
I agree. And I think, we have many resonant, like the Schumann resonance, for example, that we can calculate that, solar flares are calculate. You can see the data, the raw data. And I agree, when you watch a herd of deer, they all seem to know where to run, when to run, how to run away from a predator. Or, flocks of birds, or even horses. Horses have an interesting sense when you watch horses in a field. They all seem to know when to run, but there's no signals given generally between them. You don't see a lot of signaling. And I agree. I've seen it with animals. That part is interesting because in psychology, and I'm not a psychologist, but it's called co-regulation, where a group co-regulates together. And if they can't co-regulate together, what does that mean for where society is, on an energetic scale?
So with these energy fields, Jose mentioned the 6 feet apart, you call it something slightly different. Do you think that that's how we find our teams, our partners, or whatever, is by commingling these fields and seeing if they mesh together?
I think there's a lot of different ways to look at that. For example, we have people or places or things that come in for a reason, season, or a lifetime. So I do think there's fate points that you cannot stop. So even that gets into like time continuum points. But I do think that in a weird way, we all meet each other at specific points in our lives for very specific purposes. And even if, say, some outer force were to try and keep that from happening, it would happen anyway because there's other forces that are greater. So, now we're figuring out a workaround from something we were literally, a war tactic was placed on society. We literally saw a working war tactic placed on the collective, a mental war tactic.
Absolutely. I completely agree with that statement. And it's not over, right? Especially with the amount of disinformation, not only on social media, but in the news. And I like to call the news the broken compass. It's north, east, west, south, right? So I always take a piece of news with a grain of salt, and I always do my own research. So I think what you said has a lot of validity there. I want to move back to astrology really quick here, Kristy, because while I was doing some research in astrology, I found out there's like hundreds of different types of astrology, but I kind of focused on some of the main ones. So if you can kind of explain the difference of these type of astrology. So I found Vedic astrology, tropical astrology, and sidereal astrology. What does this all mean, and how does this affect us?
Yes. So there are different camps of astrology, and many of them are based on. So, for example, Vedic and sidereal are the same.
Okay.
Vedic astrology is generally seen in Eastern traditional astrology, which views astrology, and I think it's the most accurate. And I also think it's the most important to note, which gets into other political stuff, but it looks at the lunar cycles. So it's very much based on what's called fixed stars and the lunar cycles. And I think that's most important because the moon phases shift about every 2 days, plus or minus, where the solar energy is reflected in what's called Western/tropical astrology, which is what I learned, and that's the language I speak. But if we look at language as just like, for example, Romance languages, somebody who speaks Italian, somebody who speaks, Spanish, the languages they overlap. Vedic and Western astrology, the languages are similar. We can figure things out, but we're looking at the sun's energy or the sun's relationship with Western astrology, which if we look at capitalism has a ritual every day. The ritual is a bell is rang at the New York Stock Exchange.
Holy shit.
I
didn't realize that was a ritual.
That is a ritual.
Holy
the sun.
Wow, Jose, you keep unlocking doors here, man. You talked about this a couple episodes ago. Man, this keeps unlocking.
So, all right.
This is a great transition.
Mind blown part 2. So now that you pointed out the ritual at the New York Stock Exchange with the bell ringing, how does astrology, why is it so deeply connected in finance and why in markets?
Well, okay. So every astrologer kind of has their camp their specialty that finds them. Mine is very much related to physical placements on this planet, because Miss Gaia, Mother Earth, she has chakras as well. So, for example, Mount Shasta in California is considered the primal chakra of the earth. So that's the root chakra of the earth. Now, every city if we think of the contract of capitalism, which, debate me or not, capitalism is a contract of sorts. The contract of capitalism of modern society is based on the Declaration of Independence in many ways. There's other ways to look at it as well. But New York City also has a natal chart, which at this particular time is representing our economy. There's a world economy, but then there's the one that we're paying the man to. New York City is a Taurus sun, which is a bull, conjunct the planet Venus, which is a goddess. So, for example, the New York Stock Exchange, what's the statue down there? It's a bull.
The bull.
It's a bull.
Yeah.
Now, the bull, if we look at where the location is in Battery Park, that's the ocean. New York City is not an island, or New York City is an estuary. So New York City is a tidal pool, technically, if we think about it. The Hudson River is technically part of the ocean. So here we have a bell that we ring to the ocean, a bell that we ring to the goddess. The sun rises from the east. So we're doing a ritual, and it's to Taurus, which Taurus does rule over the stock market, the bull. So you're
Danny's face is just as impressive as mine right now, because wow, that makes total sense to me now.
The bulls and the bears.
And that's why Jesus said, let go of all your worldly possessions, because we're praising the pagan gods.
Wow.
Jeez, the love of money is praising a pagan god. Holy crap.
And the thing is, and here's the thing though, when you look at it at a grander scale, when you look at the CEOs, the bankers, the people at the World Economic Forum, they all know this. They put it on display. I don't know. I mean, you probably haven't seen it, but there was this recent clip at the World Economic Forum where they had a shaman blessing a ceremony.
Wow. I didn't know this.
Dude, this is part of my work, man. I dive into finance. I have another finance podcast that's in Spanish, and we talk about all this, right? So, but I'll bring that up here in just a moment. But wow, so these bankers are literally praising Taurus. That's basically what you're telling me.
Well, there's many ways to look at it, and that also gets into the energy and frequency of money. You know, that's something that I'm healing as well, because it's always been a very confusing subject for me, money and value and worth. Taurus as an energy is the energy of our value, you know, what we value. So when capitalism, because New York City is a Taurus sun, a Capricorn moon, and a ascendant in Cancer, so rising sign. Or it could be the flip. It could be moon. Yeah, I think it's Capricorn moon or rising. And anyway, it's Capricorn, Cancer, Taurus, which there's so many ways to look at that as well, because Capricorn and Cancer also rule the seasons as well. So basically, if you look at the chart of New York City, it's got pretty much everything covered for it, you know?
Wow. And that's also another thing that I've noticed, is that wherever there's either big business or they'll use like certain astrological alignments and ley lines in order to do the rituals or to do whatever they're going to do for that day, either be economic or astrological. So this makes tons of sense to me. So I have the thing up here. Let me bring it up so you guys can see the thing I was telling you about that shaman just coughing all over everyone doing this crazy. Yeah,
spreading the vid. What?
It's crazy. Danny, ask the next question while I find this video, because it's not coming up.
Oh my God, I don't know. I'm still in shock here. No, okay. So explain, I guess, since we're on the topic of astrology, money, and what these things mean. So I guess explain the seasons in that way, because in finance, everything's in seasons, right? Everything, you know, there's a bull season, there's a bear season. And why is it important to look at these things with your astrological eyes in some way?
Before you answer that question, check it out.
She's just spreading the vid, guys.
Just cough on you. Cough on you. I don't know if I want some shaman coughing all up on me. But that's the type of stuff these people be doing. All right, sorry about that, Kristy. Go ahead.
Well, I'm not sure what her tradition is, but I believe it's the tradition of bringing the energy or the power. So I'm not sure if she's going with air, earth, water, fire, but it's basically a blessing. And that's the other thing that, you know, this gets a little bit deeper, because that's with indigenous energy, this is the energy of Mother Earth, you know, and unfortunately, you know, I'm of Croatian, Eastern European roots. They tried to keep that away from us when we came into the US. But I think that, you know, when we look at the traditional shamanic roots, you know, that gets into what in the hell is the WEF actually harnessing from shamanic energy as well. That gets so much deeper as well, like Amazonian energy, the ley lines in the Amazon and how they connect to other ley lines across the world. You know, the rising sun over the pyramids in Egypt. But with the question of the seasons, I don't know specifically if I'm answering this correctly, but I do think that this year is specifically very seasonal. And that's, you know, very spring, summer, fall and winter, just because of something based on the North and South node. Now I'm looking at this from Western astrology, and we're going to have a very, very important eclipse for the US. It's important for the world, but it's reflecting a lot of the same and similar energies that we saw during the first Trump election, because there was an eclipse that got basically aligned with Trump's first election. So I think it's interesting. And I do wonder if they wanted him to be aligned with this upcoming eclipse as well, because 45's chart is perfectly aligned with an eclipse. He's an eclipse natal chart. So it's just interesting when we see, and are both of you in Texas?
No, just me.
No, I'm in Florida.
You're in Florida. So you're going to be in a pivotal election area as well.
Mm-hmm.
But Texas is the direct route for this upcoming eclipse in April of 2024. And so I'm very interested to see what this eclipse has to bring us, because it's going to be very illuminating, but it's going to be in Aries, and Aries is the god of war. And as we can see, the world is shaking as we speak as well.
That is interesting that you just brought that up, because that perfectly segues into my next question, which has to do with the most recent astrological event, which was Pluto moving into Aquarius. This is a significant astrological event that hasn't happened in over 200 years. The last time this happened, it happened in 1778, so 2 years after the Declaration of Independence and the Revolutionary War. So that kind of tells you what
also very important, Jose, not to forget, 2 years after my divorce.
2 years after your divorce. And that's a hell of an event, right? That's a hell of an astrological event. Pero so when we are right now, we're in the middle of this right now. It started a few weeks ago, about 10 days ago, 11 days ago. What does this mean, and what can we expect during this period? Because there's from what I've been reading, there's some major events that could be happening, a lot of energy shifting happening during this time when Pluto enters in Aquarius.
Yes, so we saw part one, and part one we were given in March of last year. So March 23rd of 2023 brought us Pluto in Aquarius, and towards the later half of 2023, there was a shift back to Pluto in Capricorn. Now, Capricorn equals capitalism. So Capricorn rules the planet Saturn. Certain people, certain camps look at Saturn in different ways. Kronos, the god of time. Some people believe that the government of the US or the world, however you want to view it, is based on the planet Saturn. And there's different ways to look at that. My moon is conjunct the planet Saturn, so my life purpose is to teach people about how the frequency of love is still in Saturn. So ultimately, Saturn means our father. Saturn means the father energy. Now, how this applies to Pluto entering the sign of Aquarius. Aquarius is co-ruled, meaning Aquarius has two homes. Aquarius is Uranus, which is the planet of chaos and sort of shaking things up, revolution. I don't know if I can use that word here.
Yeah.
But Saturn is also like structure and, how we create this life purpose for ourselves. So around the age of 28, 29, and then into our later 50s, and then every 28 years or so, we go through something called a Saturn return. It's when we get into these big times and shifts where we find our new purpose and our authority. Pluto doesn't give an F about any of that. Pluto wants to take everything down to its bare bones and transform so if we think of Pluto, there's this evolution. So we go to the seed, we go to our very most vulnerable part of ourselves, and then we're asked to rise like a phoenix. It just so happens we just saw a destruction before our eyes. And when Pluto entered the sign of Capricorn, that was the 2008 economic disaster. So then we had in 2020 something called the Great Conjunctions, where Pluto, Jupiter, and Saturn were finding each other throughout the year of 2020 over and over again. There were 4 major conjunctions that year. Now, this is a long game process. And when you're talking about something like the WEF, they know this. They know this. They know there is a technological revolution on the way. And they're trying to get there before we can. But the thing is, the sign of Aquarius is about cohesion. Why do you think they did that? What was it called? The thing with the T?
The toroidal field?
Toroidal fields. That's what it is. It's like telepathy. that kind of stuff, with that there's a beyond time and space connection between us all. Like, I can feel your energy just sitting here looking at y'all on a screen. I can feel your hearts, you know? And it has nothing to do with whether we're in the same room. And that's what this age of Aquarius is, or this I think it's Pluto in Aquarius. I think the ultimate marker for that was December 21st, 2020. I think that's when the gateway opened. That is just my opinion. That's just how I see it, based on a conjunction on that day. Some people
No, please finish. Please finish.
Some people can see it as something else. Now, Pluto was not in Aquarius then, but I think it's when those energetic doors open for a lot of people. And remember, we're in a hive. We're on a planet that is a mother body, you know? And that's when we go to indigenous tribes for help, because they're who are the warriors that still have that knowledge, you know? You know, you are both of you full 100% Puerto Rican tradition?
Mm-hmm.
Mother energy, Mary energy, you know, Mary the mother, like roses, like
that's our mother's name, literally. Maria.
Maria.
Literally.
Aw.
No, it's funny because I dove deep into this, and I dove deep into like the astrology portion because of everything that I've gone through in the last couple of years. And I know that Pluto rules the house of Scorpio, or whatever the backwards it is, right? And a lot of things that you're talking about, while it happened in the macro, I saw it happen in my life in the micro.
Absolutely.
And I wonder, how can some of these energy shifts and planet shifts that you see in astrology affect the personal, right? And you can feel free to use me as an example, since you know my sign, but how can that impact people? Like, it's really interesting to know, because we can talk about the macro, right? The macro, the money, the politics of it, but unless you're a diehard paying attention and actually give a crap, it's really not going to affect you. You're just going to live another day, and you're going to go about your day, and you're going to be another, another NPC. But if you're not an NPC, how does this affect you?
I think one of the things that I want to take note of is eclipses are big game changers in our lives for everybody. So anytime you see an eclipse on the map, and you can just Google, like, what are the eclipse schedules of 2024? Generally, eclipse bring in people, places, or things that can bring them in, and they can take them out. So a lot of times we see a lot of very famous, notable people die around an eclipse or in between an eclipse, because that's a portal of time, that people they came in for a specific job and they're leaving for a specific job, that can be when we go through divorces, or, when we meet significant people, or when, a lot of times an eclipse brings in something as something else is asked to leave, and Pluto is a scorpionic planet or dwarf star energy. So the energy of Scorpio is here to live the energy of life, death, and resurrection throughout their life. So life, death, rebirth. Life, death, rebirth. So most of the time, scorpionic people, or Pluto type people, or in astrology, 8th house type people, are going to see this patterning of life, death, and the rebirth out of that hell. Because your job is to pull other people out of hell. So in order to pull people out of the darkness, you have to understand it. I'm a Pluto person. I have Pluto in the 10th house, which is an area of our chart where you guys are seeing me. You're seeing my Scorpio. You're literally interacting with Pluto right now. Pluto's not easy. Pluto is something that goes, be better, do better, because you're meant to do more. And that's the shitty part, is we're literally going through the trash can of life, as a collective. Pluto in Aquarius, though, is saying it's no more I am, it's we are. That's going to take time. That's going to take many years for us to understand.
Amazing. That, wow, unbelievable. Danny, This is the best guest you brought so far, man.
So far. I don't know. Our first guest was pretty dark.
Yeah, but he was awesome. Juan was great. All of our guests have been amazing, but this has just been enlightening and just eye-opening. We definitely need to bring Kristy back because, I mean, we can.
And here's the thing: we need to find what we need to do. And I'll tell you this because I've done this with Kristy on my podcast. We need to find the next Friday the 13th on the calendar schedule and have her back on that day and have her just go off because there's something about a Friday the 13th.
Well, I got married on a Friday the 13th.
Yeah.
Well,
I got married on a
there's something about her doing her thing on Friday the 13th that it just hits different. Also gives you bone chilling Art Bell vibes, and it's amazing. Just saying.
You know, Kristy, you mentioned something about when people die around eclipses, it's usually rituals. You know, it's whoever they may be, right? And we're going to use that as a broad term. They will do these rituals on full moons and on eclipses. And when they're doing it on eclipses, because it's something huge. And the most recent thing that comes to my mind is Matthew Perry.
Oh,
Matthew
yes.
Perry. It was not only a drowning ritual, but it was a full moon ritual because he drowned under the full moon.
Mm-hmm.
So when we see these things happen, or, you know, I see them, people, the news would be like, oh, he died as a tragic thing. And I'm not saying that it's not tragic. It is tragic, right? But there's always another meaning. So what does this all mean to like the general public when we see like rituals done on these astrological dates or alignments or full moons or eclipses? Like, what does this all mean to the, if you could just make it simple, what does it all mean?
Well, I would say in your personal life, you know, we can't control what an eclipse is going to do. You know, a lot of astrologers will say you shouldn't do manifesting anything around an eclipse. Like you shouldn't. I view the moon as something to be respected. I think that's why Vedic and Western astrology, where they're at odds right now. And I think that's why we're seeing the shift in society. So on a personal scale, just honor the moon cycles and just thank the moon. You know, that is something as simple, like with a full moon, you're releasing and letting go. That's really what it means. You're letting go of fear, write a letter to the fear, rip it up, put it in the trash can, let it go. With a new moon, you're bringing in the new. You're asking for new goals to be set. You're asking for very specific things in your life. Write down that goals list. Super simple. This is what I do. Visualization. You know, we have the Lunar New Year on the way in Aquarius. So this is going to be a very interesting week ahead. I'm not sure when this goes out, but we're heading into an Aquarius Lunar New Year. So this is a very interesting time, and that's what people can do. Now, when it comes to what H-Wood does, you know, I'm approaching it with curiosity because there's a lot of examples out there, and it just seems to be something to ask questions about.
Yeah. Hollywood, they call it Hollyweird for something, for a reason, right? Kristy, go ahead and plug all your stuff in so people can know where to find you.
Sure. I'm very grateful to be here. My name is Kristy Belich. I'm a stand-up comic, and I do astrology and tarot on my podcast, Trust Your Glitter. You can find me everywhere there's podcasts, Spotify, YouTube, and trustyourglitter.com. And I thank you guys so much for having me.
Thank you so much for coming on the show, Danny. Do you got anything else to add?
No, I just want to point out the song that's playing in the background for Kristy. This is Give You Vibes Up. Oh, snap. Give it up. Oh, snap. Give it up to the Art Bell vibes. Shout out to the Art Bell family from the Kingdom of Texas. And it's trying to shut me up. Guys, thank you so much for watching. My name is Daniel Gonzalez, a.k.a. Poppy the Comic. You can find me on all socials. Jose, nice to have you on another episode, bro. Again.
It's always great. It's always great to do this. I love you guys. Thank you for being on the show. Make sure to follow us on all of our social media. Make sure you subscribe to the YouTube and Rumble at Cultura Truth Project. Follow Gonzalez Media TV on Facebook, Instagram at Gonzalez Media TV, and subscribe to the podcast on all major platforms: Spotify, Apple Podcasts, iHeartRadio, Google Podcasts, and leave a 5-star review. Bueno, mi gente, we love you, and we'll see you in the next episode.
See you next time.